She was starving, exhausted, and down to her last dollar when she spotted it. A leather wallet, bulging with cash. Enough to feed her for months, enough to get her off the streets. But as Sarah's trembling fingers opened it, she saw his face on the ID card. Henry Mitchell, one of the richest men in the city. What would you do if you were homeless, hungry, and holding a millionaire's wallet? Sarah's split-second decision changed everything. Not just for her, but for a broken family she didn't even know existed. This isn't just another rags-to-riches story. It's about what happens when integrity collides with desperation. Sarah's stomach contracted painfully as she huddled on the edge of a park bench, the cold metal seeping through her thin jacket. 3 days without a proper meal had left her lightheaded, her body conserving what little energy remained. She slipped a trembling hand into her pocket and pulled out the few coins that represented the entirety of her worldly wealth. 87 cents, not even enough for the cheapest item on any fast food menu. The autumn wind cut through her inadequate clothing as she arranged the coins in her palm, as if counting them again might somehow increase their value. 3 quarters, 1 dime, and 2 pennies glinted dully in the fading afternoon light. She closed her fingers around them, feeling their weight, so insignificant compared to the heaviness in her chest. 7 job interviews in 10 days, and 7 rejections. The last manager hadn't even bothered to call her back, leaving her waiting by a payphone for hours. "We've decided to go with someone with more recent experience," they all said in different ways, their eyes sliding away from the address she'd listed, the community shelter downtown. But tonight, even that meager refuge was beyond her reach. Full capacity for the 3rd night in a row, the intake coordinator had informed her that morning, genuine regret in her eyes. "Try again tomorrow, Sarah. Come early." Sarah slipped the coins back into her pocket and forced herself to stand. Her legs protested, muscles weak from undernourishment, and the miles she'd walked searching for work. The park was relatively safe during daylight hours, but as evening approached it would become the territory of those whose desperation had pushed them toward darker solutions than hers. Honesty is the only thing in this world no one can take from you unless you give it away. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind as she shuffled forward. The words had been repeated throughout her childhood, usually accompanied by the smell of fresh bread and the warmth of the small kitchen where she'd learned everything important about life. Her grandmother had raised her with nothing but love and uncompromising principles after her parents' fatal car accident. Now, 3 months after burying the woman who had been her only family, Sarah found herself wondering if principles could fill an empty stomach or provide shelter from the coming night. She walked past a row of restaurants, each doorway releasing a burst of savory aromas that made her dizzy with longing. A couple emerged from an Italian bistro, the woman casually dropping half a breadstick into a trash can. Sarah's steps faltered, her gaze fixed on the discarded food. For a moment, hunger overwhelmed dignity, and she considered retrieving it. "No," she whispered, clenching her fists and moving on. "Not yet. Not that far gone." But her body disagreed. The world tilted suddenly, darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. Sarah managed 3 more faltering steps before her knees buckled. She barely felt the impact as she collapsed onto a park bench, her consciousness dimming like a candle guttering in the wind. Dreams and memories blended together. Her grandmother's kitchen, the hospital room where she'd said goodbye, the increasingly desperate job interviews. The sound of rapid footsteps pulled her back to consciousness, though her eyes remained too heavy to open. Someone was rushing past her bench, their pace urgent. Then came a soft thud. Something dropped on the pathway just feet away from where she sat. Sarah forced her eyes open, blinking away the lingering fog of exhaustion. The footsteps continued, fading into the distance. She glanced down and froze. There, on the path before her, lay a leather wallet, rich, well-worn brown leather that spoke of quality and expense. For several seconds, she didn't move. The wallet seemed surreal, like an answer to a prayer she'd been too tired and proud to make. Slowly, she leaned forward and picked it up, the leather warm and substantial in her palm. She glanced around, but the park had emptied as evening approached. The owner was long gone, unaware of their loss. Her hands trembled not from hunger now, but from a different kind of tension. Inside this wallet might be enough money for a room for the night, a hot meal, maybe even a few days of shelter while she continued her job search. No one would know. No one would blame her. Honesty is the only thing in this world no one can take from you. Sarah closed her eyes. Her grandmother's voice, stronger now, as clear as if she were sitting beside her on the bench. When she opened them again, her decision was made. She would look for identification and return the wallet. But first, she needed to know whose life had intersected with hers at this desperate moment. She opened the fine leather bifold carefully. Several crisp $100 bills were visible immediately. More money than she'd held in months. But it was the driver's license in the clear plastic window that captured her attention. The face of a man in his early 40s looked back at her, handsome in a serious way, with piercing eyes that seemed to assess her even from the photograph. Below the image was the name, Henry Mitchell. Sarah's breath caught. She recognized that name from business magazines she'd read in waiting rooms during her job hunt. Henry Mitchell, tech innovator and investor. His latest venture had been featured in a business journal just last week, something about revolutionary medical technology. The article had estimated his net worth at over $200 million. She slipped the license from its holder and turned it over, finding the address printed on the back. It was in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city, an area she'd only seen from a distance. With trembling fingers, she carefully returned the ID to its place and continued her inventory. Credit cards, business cards, a folded check, and more cash than she'd seen in one place since before her grandmother's medical bills had drained their modest savings. For a moment, she imagined what she could do with even a fraction of this money. A safe place to sleep, new clothes for interviews, perhaps even a chance to finish the nursing degree she'd abandoned to care for her grandmother. The thoughts swirled through her mind like autumn leaves caught in the wind. But then she closed the wallet firmly, her decision hardening, like amber preserving the principles her grandmother had instilled in her. This money wasn't hers. No matter how desperate her situation, taking it would mean giving away the one thing she still possessed, her integrity. Sarah tucked the wallet into her jacket pocket and stood, fighting against the wave of dizziness that threatened to overtake her again. The address was miles away, in a part of town she'd likely be viewed with suspicion for even entering. It would take the last of her strength to make the journey, but something deeper than logic drove her forward, a sense that this moment, this choice, mattered more than she could possibly understand. As she began her trek across the city, darkness settled over the park behind her. Each step sent pain shooting through her empty stomach and exhausted limbs. Yet somehow, the weight of the wallet against her side seemed to lighten her burden rather than increase it. This was a test, perhaps, or an opportunity, though for what, she couldn't yet imagine. The journey would take hours. She might collapse again before reaching her destination. But Sarah kept walking, propelled by the last vestiges of her strength and the knowledge that at this moment, when she had nothing else left to lose, she was choosing to hold on to the one thing that could never be taken from her. The leather wallet seemed to grow heavier in Sarah's pocket with each passing minute, as if the moral weight of her decision was manifesting physically. She had faced this crossroads before, when reporting workplace misconduct had cost her previous jobs, but never when the stakes were literally life or death. Finding a secluded corner of the park, she pulled out the wallet and opened it with trembling fingers, the rich leather supple against her calloused hands. Inside lay more cash than she had seen in months. Sarah quickly estimated there must be at least $2,000 in crisp bills, neatly arranged. She imagined what that money could provide. 2 weeks in a decent motel, daily hot meals, clean clothes, a phone to make calls for job applications, a chance to shower before interviews. It represented not just survival, but dignity restored, the opportunity to rise from the ground where life had knocked her down. Her fingers hovered over the bills as her vision blurred. When was the last time she had eaten something that wasn't discarded or donated? The memory of warm food made her stomach contract painfully. $100 would make little difference to a man worth millions, but to her, it meant everything. She could take just enough for immediate needs and still return the rest. Would that be so wrong? Honor isn't something you can parcel out in pieces, Sarah girl. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind with such clarity that Sarah nearly turned to look for her. In her final days, Grandma Ellen had gripped Sarah's hand with surprising strength, her eyes fierce despite her failing body. Do what's right even when no one is watching. Honesty is worth more than anything money can buy. Those words had been her mantra, repeated throughout Sarah's childhood, until they became the foundation upon which she built her life. Sarah had believed those words once without question, but that was before she'd lost 3 jobs in succession for reporting safety violations, embezzlement, and sexual harassment. Before her landlord had evicted her when she couldn't make rent after the last firing. Before she'd watched her grandmother's medical bills consume their modest savings, leaving nothing but debts when she passed. Before Sarah learned that doing the right thing often came with consequences that the wrongdoers never seemed to face. She ran her thumb across the driver's license in the wallet. Henry Mitchell's face looked back at her, confident, well-groomed, successful. She recognized the address listed beneath his name. Years ago, she had cleaned houses in that exclusive neighborhood, dusting crystal vases worth more than a month of her salary, and polishing silver that had never known hunger. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now contemplating returning a wallet to a neighborhood where she had once been welcome only through the service entrance. Sarah closed the wallet and pressed it between her palms, as if trying to squeeze an answer from its leather folds. A memory surfaced, her grandmother catching her at 8 years old with a candy bar she'd slipped into her pocket at the corner store. Instead of anger, Grandma Ellen had shown disappointment, which cut deeper than any scolding. "You're better than this, Sarah. We might not have much, but we have our good name. Never give someone a reason to think less of you than you are." Was she still that person her grandmother believed in? Or had survival stripped away those luxuries of character, leaving behind only the raw instinct to endure? Sarah stood up, her muscles protesting the movement after so long without proper nourishment. The distance to Mitchell's address would take hours on foot, hours her body might not have the strength to endure. She could feel the weakness in her limbs, the lightheadedness that had become her constant companion. There was a very real possibility she might collapse again before reaching her destination. She opened the wallet one last time, her eyes lingering on a single $100 bill. Just one, enough for a meal and perhaps a night somewhere warm. Surely that was a reasonable compromise between integrity and survival. Her fingers moved toward the bill, then stopped. She couldn't bring herself to take even a single dollar, not because she feared consequences or hoped for reward, but because in this moment, with nothing else to her name, her integrity was the only possession no one could take from her. With a decisive snap, Sarah closed the wallet and tucked it securely in her inner pocket. The choice wasn't about Mitchell or what he might do if she returned his property. It wasn't even about her grandmother's teachings, though they had shaped her moral compass. This decision was about who Sarah chose to be when tested at her lowest point. She would not allow desperation to erode the foundation of her character, even if that foundation was all she had left. The first step toward Mitchell's neighborhood sent a shock of pain through her undernourished body. The second was no easier. By the third, Sarah had established a rhythm that she hoped would carry her forward. One painful step after another. She passed storefronts with displays of food that made her mouth water. She averted her eyes from cafes where patrons casually spent more on a single coffee than she had to her name. With each block, memories of her past jobs surfaced. The restaurant where she'd reported the owner for stealing servers' tips, only to find herself scheduled for 0 hours the following week. The accounting firm where she'd noticed discrepancies in client billing and brought it to her supervisor's attention, not realizing he was orchestrating the scheme. The luxury boutique where she'd defended a fellow employee against the manager's unwanted advances, resulting in both their terminations. Her integrity had cost her everything time and again. Yet here she was, walking miles to return a wallet that could solve her immediate problems, because somewhere deep inside, she still believed her grandmother was right. That honor mattered, that she was more than her circumstances, that doing the right thing had value, even when it came with a price tag she could ill afford. As the neighborhoods gradually transformed from commercial districts to residential areas, then to increasingly affluent streets. Sarah felt increasingly out of place. Her worn clothes and unwashed appearance drew stares from passing joggers and people walking designer dogs. She kept her head high, despite their judgmental glances. Let them stare. They knew nothing of the strength it took to make this journey, when every instinct screamed at her to prioritize survival. The elegant homes grew larger, set further back from the street behind manicured hedges and ornate gates. Sarah checked the address on the license again, confirming she was heading in the right direction. 2 more miles. Her legs trembled with each step now, and hunger had progressed from a gnawing pain to a strange, hollow emptiness that made her movements mechanical. For a brief moment, Sarah allowed herself to imagine what might happen when she arrived. Would servants answer the door and dismiss her before she could explain? Would Mitchell himself appear, surprised to see his wallet returned? Would he offer a reward? The fantasy of gratitude and recognition flickered briefly before she extinguished it. She wasn't making this journey for recognition or reward. Expectations would only lead to disappointment. Standing before the towering iron gates of Mitchell's estate, Sarah felt the weight of social disparity like never before. The mansion beyond wasn't just wealthy, it was another world entirely, a fortress of privilege that made even her modest hopes seem absurd. The elegant stone pillars supporting the gate rose like sentinels, warning those who didn't belong to keep their distance. Security cameras tracked her approach with mechanical indifference, their lenses cataloging every detail of her appearance. The worn shoes, the threadbare jacket, the exhaustion that no amount of determined dignity could fully mask. A uniformed guard emerged from a small booth, his eyes narrowing as he assessed her. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone making it clear that help wasn't what he had in mind. "I need to see Mr. Mitchell," Sarah said, straightening her shoulders, despite the hunger-induced weakness that made standing an effort. "I found something that belongs to him." The guard's expression shifted from cautious to dismissive. "Mr. Mitchell isn't expecting any visitors today." His gaze traveled from her unwashed hair to her stained shoes, making no attempt to hide his assessment. "Especially someone who looks like they live on the street." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. "I understand how this must look, but I found his wallet and need to return it to him personally." She pulled the leather wallet from her pocket, holding it up as evidence. The guard's expression changed to one of suspicion. "Hand it over. I'll make sure he gets it." "I'm sorry, but I'd prefer to give it to Mr. Mitchell myself." Sarah clutched the wallet more tightly, the last remnant of control, in a situation where everything else placed her at a disadvantage. With obvious disdain, the guard reached for the intercom. "Name? Sarah. Sarah Collins." As the guard spoke into the intercom, describing her in unflattering terms that she pretended not to hear, Sarah took in the expansive grounds beyond the gate. Perfectly trimmed hedges lined a curved driveway that disappeared around a bend, hinting at even more opulence beyond. The manicured perfection of every visible detail stood in stark contrast to the chaotic struggle her life had become. The guard's stern expression melted into surprise as he listened to the response from the main house. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." He hung up and turned to Sarah with newfound uncertainty. "Mr. Mitchell says to send you up." The electronic gates parted with a soft, mechanical hum, opening to a world Sarah had only glimpsed while cleaning houses in this neighborhood years ago. "Follow the driveway to the main entrance," the guard instructed, his tone slightly less hostile but still wary. Each step up the long, winding driveway revealed more of the property's grandeur. The mansion gradually came into view, a sprawling structure that looked more like a palace than a home, with tall, imposing windows and architectural details that spoke of both old money and modern tastes. Sarah couldn't help calculating how many years of her former salary it would take to afford even the smallest corner of such a place. The grounds themselves were a testament to the different reality Henry Mitchell inhabited. While Sarah had been counting pennies for a meal, someone was paid to ensure every blade of grass stood at the perfect height. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. The wallet she carried contained enough money to temporarily save her from destitution. Yet she walked past water features that likely cost more than she had earned in her entire working life. Pride in her decision mingled with an acute awareness of what she was giving up. The money in that wallet represented immediate relief: food, shelter, a chance to clean herself properly, and perhaps secure a job interview where her appearance wouldn't immediately disqualify her. Yet here she was, walking toward uncertainty, instead of solving her most pressing problems. The path seemed to stretch endlessly, each step bringing fresh details of wealth into focus. Statuary, positioned with artistic precision, lighting designed to highlight architectural features, seasonal flowers blooming in carefully orchestrated color schemes. It was beautiful, but also alienating, a reminder that society was designed to keep people like her outside these gates. As she approached the house, Sarah noticed that her hands were trembling slightly. Not from hunger this time, but from the overwhelming sense that she didn't belong here. The marble steps leading to the front entrance gleamed in the afternoon sun, so pristine she almost felt guilty for placing her worn shoes upon them. Standing before the massive wooden door, ornately carved and flanked by decorative glass panels, Sarah hesitated. Should she knock? Look for a doorbell? Before she could decide, the door swung open. Instead of the butler or housekeeper she expected, Henry Mitchell himself stood in the doorway. He was taller than his ID photo suggested, dressed in an elegant suit that probably cost more than 6 months of rent at her former apartment. What struck her most, however, wasn't his obvious wealth, but the tired lines around his eyes, a humanity she hadn't expected to see. "Ms. Collins?" he asked, his voice neither warm nor cold, simply curious. "Yes," she replied, extending the wallet toward him. "I found this in the park earlier today. I checked the ID and wanted to return it to you personally." Mitchell took the wallet, opening it with quick, efficient movements. She watched as he checked through the contents, noticing the strange sense of relief that crossed his face when he saw everything was intact. "You didn't take anything?" The question wasn't accusatory, but seemed genuinely surprised. "No, sir," Sarah said simply, offering no explanation or self-congratulation for her honesty. Something shifted in his expression, a reassessment. For the first time since she arrived, Sarah felt seen not as an intruder or a charity case, but as a person who had made a choice that mattered. "Would you like to come in?" he asked, stepping aside to create space in the doorway. Sarah hesitated, acutely aware of her appearance against the backdrop of such luxury. "I don't want to impose. I just wanted to make sure you got everything back safely." "Please," he insisted, with a gesture that somehow acknowledged and dismissed the obvious differences between them simultaneously. "The least I can do is offer you some refreshment after you've gone out of your way." As Sarah stepped across the threshold, she entered a foyer larger than her entire former apartment. Marble floors stretched beneath a crystal chandelier, while artwork that belonged in museums adorned the walls. The contrast between her worn clothes and this opulence couldn't have been more stark, yet something in Mitchell's gaze held neither pity nor judgment, only a growing curiosity. "Most people wouldn't have returned this," he said, still holding the wallet as if reassessing its significance. "Especially someone in—" He paused, seemingly searching for words that wouldn't offend. "In my circumstances?" Sarah offered, saving him from the awkwardness. He nodded, studying her with new interest. "Why did you—" It was a simple question, with a complicated answer. Sarah could have spoken about her grandmother's teachings, about integrity being the one thing no one could take from her. She could have explained how being honest had cost her jobs and security. Instead, she gave him the most honest answer of all: "Because it was yours, not mine." Something in those words seemed to reach beyond the surface transaction. Mitchell's expression softened, recognition dawning in his eyes, not of her status or circumstances, but of her humanity. In that moment, the vast social distance between them seemed to narrow, not because she had risen to his level or he had descended to hers, but because they had momentarily met in the space where human dignity transcends social boundaries. Mitchell's assessment shifted from her threadbare appearance to something far more valuable, hiding beneath the surface. In a society where worth is measured by bank accounts and social standing, what happens when a millionaire discovers that the most precious qualities can't be bought or sold? Sarah stepped into a world that existed only in magazine spreads and daytime television for most people in her situation. The foyer opened to a great room with ceilings that seemed to reach toward heaven itself, adorned with artwork that probably cost more than she would have earned in 5 years at her previous jobs. A housekeeper appeared silently in a doorway, her eyes widening momentarily at Sarah's appearance, before her professional mask slipped back into place. The woman's surprise was evident. This was not the type of visitor typically welcomed into the sanctuary of wealth. "Would you like some tea?" Henry asked, gesturing toward an elegant sitting area where furniture that belonged in a museum waited. Sarah hesitated, acutely aware of how out of place she must appear. Her clothes had seen better days weeks ago, and she hadn't had access to proper bathing facilities for longer than she cared to admit. The contrast between her current state and the immaculate surroundings made her want to disappear. "I don't want to impose," she said quietly, fighting the urge to wrap her arms around herself protectively. "I just wanted to return what's yours." Henry studied her more closely. There was something about her, a quiet strength, a kind of honesty he rarely saw in people anymore. In his world of business deals and social climbing, genuineness was often the first casualty of ambition. But this woman, standing uncomfortably in his home with nothing to her name, possessed an integrity that made her seem taller than her physical stature suggested. "Please, sit," he said, his tone softer than before. "After walking all this way, it's the least I can do." Sarah perched on the edge of a cream-colored sofa, terrified of transferring any dirt from her clothes to the pristine fabric. She placed the wallet carefully on the glass coffee table between them, sliding it toward Henry with a gentle push. "Everything's there," she assured him. "I didn't take anything." Henry picked up the wallet and opened it, confirming her words with a quick glance. "I believe you," he said, looking up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "But I have to ask, why? You clearly need the money." The question wasn't accusatory, but genuinely curious. In his experience, people acted in their self-interest. Someone in Sarah's position had every reason to keep the wallet, or at least help themselves to some of the cash inside. "It wasn't mine to take," she replied simply. "That's all there is to it." Henry reached for his wallet again, extracting several $100 bills. "Let me give you a reward then, for your honesty and the trouble you went through to return it." Sarah shook her head firmly. "No, thank you. I don't want payment for doing what anyone should do." Her stomach chose that moment to betray her, letting out an audible growl that echoed in the spacious room. Heat rushed to her face as embarrassment washed over her. She'd been trying so hard to maintain her dignity, despite everything, and now her basic bodily functions had undermined her efforts. Henry didn't comment on the sound, but his gaze intensified as he took in more details about her condition. The slight hollowing of her cheeks, the way her collarbone protruded visibly above the neckline of her shirt, the dullness of her skin that spoke of prolonged malnourishment. She wasn't just down on her luck, she was in a desperate situation. "Wait here a moment," he said abruptly, standing up. He disappeared through one of the many doorways leading from the great room, leaving Sarah alone with her discomfort and the lingering echo of her stomach's complaint. Sarah sat perfectly still, afraid to touch anything. On a side table near her, a framed photograph caught her attention. Henry, with a young boy, perhaps 9 or 10 years old. They were smiling, but there was something guarded in both their expressions, as if the photographer had captured a moment of performed happiness rather than genuine joy. Henry returned with a cup of tea and a plate with 2 cheese rolls. "I hope you like them," he said, handing her the plate. The gesture was so unexpected that Sarah hesitated before accepting it. The food looked simple, but delicious, and the aroma made her mouth water instantly. "Thank you," she managed, fighting the urge to devour the food immediately. Instead, she took a small, controlled bite, struggling to eat at a pace that wouldn't reveal the depth of her hunger. Henry sat across from her again, his businessman's analytical gaze giving way to something more human. "May I ask about your situation?" he inquired after she'd had a few bites. "What kind of work do you do?" Sarah swallowed carefully before answering. "I've done office administration, some accounting work. Most recently, I was in customer service for a shipping company." She didn't mention why she'd lost that position, or the ones before it. "I've been looking for something new for a while now." "And your living situation?" He asked the question gently, but directness seemed part of his nature. Sarah considered lying, but decided against it. Honesty had guided her this far. She might as well continue. "I don't have one at the moment. The shelters are full. Henry nodded, absorbing this information without judgment. What are your strengths, besides exceptional integrity, which I've already witnessed? The question felt like a job interview, though surely that couldn't be what was happening. Sarah took a sip of tea to gather her thoughts. I'm reliable. I learn quickly. I'm good with details and organized. And I work hard. I always have. As she spoke, something changed in Henry's expression. His assessment was shifting from surface observations to a deeper evaluation of her character and potential. The power imbalance between them remained vast. He, comfortable in his mansion, with all his resources, and she, dependent on his hospitality for the food she was now eating. But there was also a flicker of recognition, as if he saw something in her that transcended their different circumstances. I can help you, he said suddenly. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. I don't want charity. It's not charity. It's gratitude. What do you need? The directness of his question left her momentarily speechless. What did she need? Everything and nothing. A job, a place to sleep, a chance to rebuild her life, but not handouts that would further erode her sense of self-worth. Before she could formulate a response, Henry continued, I want you to work here as my son's caregiver. You'll have a place to stay, food, a steady salary, and everything you need to rebuild your life. The offer seemed too convenient, too perfect, making Sarah suspicious. Why would you trust someone you just met with your child? You don't know anything about me. I know what matters, Henry replied, glancing at the wallet on the table. You showed your character when you were at your lowest point. That tells me more than any resume or reference could. Sarah set down her teacup, trying to process what was happening. Was this real opportunity or elaborate charity? Was there a catch she couldn't yet see? The job sounded like a lifeline, exactly what she needed at exactly the right moment, which made it seem almost too good to be true. Your son, she said carefully. Tell me about him. Something flickered across Henry's face. Grief, worry, hope. Ethan is 10. He needs someone patient, someone who understands that sometimes pain can't be fixed right away. He paused, seeming to choose his next words with care. He's been through a lot. In that moment, Sarah recognized that this wasn't just about her needs or Henry's gratitude. There was a child involved, one who apparently needed help that Henry, for all his wealth and resources, couldn't provide alone. This realization transformed the offer from potential charity to genuine exchange, her skills and compassion for stability and purpose. While Henry Mitchell's wealth had provided him with everything material he could ever need, it had proven painfully inadequate against the most profound challenge he now faced. As he led Sarah through the eastern wing of the mansion toward a closed door with a hand-painted nameplate, his voice dropped to a hushed tone. My son Ethan hasn't spoken a single word in 2 years, Henry explained, the admission visibly costing him. Not since his mother's car accident. The doctors call it selective mutism, triggered by trauma. His fingers hovered over the doorknob, hesitating. He's seen the best child psychologists in the country, but he remains locked in his silence. It's as if part of him died with her. Sarah absorbed this information without the pitying expression Henry had grown accustomed to seeing. Instead, her eyes reflected something deeper, recognition. Sometimes, she said quietly, silence is the only language that makes sense when everything else feels impossible. Henry's gaze lingered on her face for a moment before he knocked gently and opened the door. The room beyond was spacious and filled with natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden. It was a child's paradise by conventional standards. A custom gaming system occupied one corner, shelves of untouched toys lined another wall, and a collection of books that would make any school library envious filled a built-in bookcase. Yet despite the abundance, the room carried an unmistakable emptiness. In the center sat a small boy with sandy brown hair, hunched over a drawing pad. He didn't look up when they entered, his pencil continuing its methodical movement across the paper. Sarah noticed immediately that unlike most children's rooms, which typically displayed organized chaos, Ethan's possessions remained in perfect, untouched order. The pristine arrangement spoke volumes about a child who had withdrawn from engagement with the world around him. Ethan, Henry said gently, this is Sarah. She's going to be staying with us for a while." The boy's pencil paused momentarily, the only indication he had heard his father at all. Then, slowly, he lifted his head. Sarah found herself looking into eyes that reflected a pain far too profound for his 10 years, eyes that carried the unmistakable weight of grief she recognized from her own reflection in the months after her grandmother's passing. Sarah approached, but stopped at a respectful distance. She didn't crouch down as adults often do with children, a gesture that can feel patronizing. Instead, she simply said, "Hello, Ethan," with none of the exaggerated cheerfulness adults typically affect around children they perceive as damaged or fragile. To Henry's visible astonishment, Ethan's gaze remained fixed on Sarah, studying her with an intensity he hadn't shown toward anyone in months. Most visitors received nothing more than a fleeting glance before he returned to his drawings. "May I see what you're working on?" Sarah asked, not expecting a verbal response, but offering the question as a genuine request rather than a strategy to force interaction. After a moment of consideration, Ethan turned his drawing pad slightly in her direction. The page revealed meticulous illustrations of various birds, each rendered with surprising skill for a child his age. Sarah recognized chickadees, cardinals, and blue jays, the kind that frequented the garden visible from his window. "You're very talented," she said simply. "I've always loved watching birds. They seem so free, don't they?" Another subtle shift in Ethan's expression suggested her words had landed somewhere meaningful. Henry stood back, his posture tense with hope and anticipation. Sarah sensed his eagerness and the pressure it created in the room. "Your father mentioned you might show me around later," she continued, deliberately giving Ethan an easy out. "But only if you'd like to. I understand if you prefer your space." Henry cleared his throat. "I should mention that we've had 4 different nannies in the past year," he said, his voice tinged with both frustration and sadness. "All highly qualified, all with impressive references. 2 child psychologists have attempted regular sessions, but," he gestured helplessly, "Ethan has his own timeline, they tell me. We can't force progress." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "No one's timeline for grief is the same," she said, directing her words to Ethan, rather than speaking about him, as if he weren't present. "When my grandmother died, people kept telling me how I should feel and when I should move on. But grief doesn't follow other people's schedules." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, a spark of recognition. Children experiencing the death of a parent often grapple with well-meaning adults who fail to understand the profound psychological impact of such a loss. The absence of a primary caregiver shatters a child's sense of security, creating anxiety and profound sadness that can manifest in various ways, including withdrawal. As Sarah spoke, she noticed a small shelf near Ethan's bed with several framed photographs. One showed a beautiful woman with Ethan's same sandy hair, laughing as she hugged a younger version of the boy. The resemblance between them was striking. "Your mother had a wonderful smile," Sarah observed gently. "I see her in you." For a moment, the air in the room seemed to still. Henry tensed visibly, perhaps worried the direct mention might trigger a negative reaction. But Ethan simply reached for another drawing from a stack beside him, and after a brief hesitation, extended it towards Sarah. Unlike the bird illustrations, this drawing depicted not a person, but a bird, with one wing damaged, perched precariously on a branch. Despite its injury, the bird's posture suggested determination rather than defeat. The detail was remarkable, the uninjured wing protectively curved around the damaged one, the eyes alert and watchful. Sarah accepted the drawing with the reverence it deserved. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "we learn to fly differently after we've been hurt. Not the same as before, but still flying." Henry's breath caught audibly. In that simple exchange, Sarah had managed to communicate something fundamental about trauma and resilience that all the expensive therapists had failed to convey. Children with selective mutism often use alternative forms of expression to manage overwhelming emotions, and Ethan's art clearly served as his voice in the silence. Looking up at Henry, Sarah saw complex emotions crossing his face. Hope mingled with a father's profound worry, and something else. Recognition that his wealth, which had always solved his problems, had proven useless against his son's pain. What Ethan needed wasn't found in the family's financial resources, but in the shared language of loss that Sarah instinctively spoke. Later, as they stepped out of Ethan's room, Henry leaned against the hallway wall, visibly moved. "He's never done that before," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sharing his drawings, I mean. The therapists have tried for months to get him to express himself through art therapy, but he's always refused." Sarah nodded, understanding the significance. "The broken wing drawing isn't about his mother directly," she explained. "It's about himself. Children who experience profound loss often see themselves as damaged. But notice how the bird is still perched, still watching. It hasn't given up." Henry studied her with new eyes, seeing beyond her circumstances to the depth of understanding she possessed. "How did you know what to say? The experts all had strategies and techniques, but you just—" "I recognized his silence," Sarah said simply. "It's not about having the right words. Sometimes it's about being comfortable in the absence of them. Sometimes the most profound healing begins not with words, but in the spaces between them." As Sarah unpacked her meager belongings in the room adjacent to Ethan's, she couldn't help but feel the stark contrast between her current surroundings and the park bench where she had spent too many recent nights. The walls were a soft blue, the bed adorned with crisp linens that smelled of lavender, and a small writing desk sat beneath a window overlooking the garden. This space, so modest by the mansion's standards yet palatial compared to homelessness, represented more than just shelter. It was the foundation upon which she would attempt to rebuild what had been shattered. The first week passed in a fog of adjustment. Sarah found herself awakening in panic before dawn, momentarily disoriented by the comfort surrounding her. Her body, accustomed to constant vigilance, struggled to accept security as its new reality. The mansion's routines were foreign. Breakfast served promptly at 7, staff meetings at 8, and the precise schedule of Ethan's day mapped out in 15-minute increments that previous caretakers had followed without success. Mrs. Martha, the housekeeper whose reign over the household predated even Ethan's birth, watched Sarah with narrowed eyes and tight lips. Her skepticism manifested in small ways, directions given with clipped precision, supplies arranged just out of convenient reach, and conversations that ceased abruptly when Sarah entered a room. The cook, a jovial man named Raymond, proved more welcoming, slipping Sarah extra portions and offering tentative smiles that suggested he was reserving judgment. "They've all tried their methods," Raymond confided one afternoon as Sarah helped him prepare Ethan's favorite sandwich, though the boy had barely touched his food for months. "Therapists with their scientific approaches, nannies with their strict routines. None of them understood that boy needs someone who understands silence." Sarah nodded, carefully cutting the crusts from the bread. "Some wounds don't heal with words," she replied, remembering how she had retreated into herself after her parents' deaths, how her grandmother had simply sat beside her, not demanding conversation, but offering presence instead. With Ethan, Sarah employed the same intuitive approach. Rather than forcing interaction, she created opportunities for expression. She placed art supplies within reach, but never insisted he use them. She played soft music while organizing his room, but didn't comment when his fingers occasionally tapped along. When she read books aloud, she did so while seeming focused on her own enjoyment, allowing him to listen without pressure. On the 9th day, a breakthrough, small but significant. Ethan entered the room where Sarah sorted through a collection of children's books, a volume clutched to his chest. Without speaking, he put it in her hands, a worn copy of The Velvet Room, then sat on the floor a few feet away. Sarah began without commentary, her voice steady and warm. The distance between them measured more than physical space, but as the story unfolded, Ethan inched closer, eventually settling near enough that Sarah could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. Henry observed these subtle changes from doorways and hallways, his businessman's assessment gradually softening into something more. Sarah caught him watching one afternoon as she and Ethan worked side by side, each drawing in separate sketchbooks without exchanging a word. The tenderness in Henry's expression made her chest tighten, recognition of something precious and fragile, taking root in the mansion's grief-soaked soil. "He's different with you," Henry acknowledged during their weekly meeting about Ethan's progress. "Not dramatic changes, but there's a quality to his silence that's shifted. Before, it felt like absence. Now, it feels like presence. He's here, even when he's not speaking." The household rhythm gradually altered to accommodate Sarah's natural warmth. Staff members who had maintained professional distance began lingering in conversations. Doors previously kept closed stood ajar. Windows that had remained shuttered were opened to admit sunshine. Even Mrs. Martha's posture relaxed incrementally, particularly after she witnessed Ethan willingly take Sarah's hand while crossing the garden to the house, a gesture so ordinary yet extraordinary in context. One rainy afternoon, Sarah discovered photo albums tucked away in the library's bottom shelf. Initially hesitant, her curiosity eventually overcame her discretion. The pages revealed the woman whose absence had shaped the household, Catherine Mitchell, with Ethan's same sandy and wide smile. Photos captured her laughing in gardens, cradling infant Ethan, and gazing at Henry with adoration. The images provided context for the echoing Sarah had sensed from her first day. This home hadn't merely lost a person, but the very heart that had made it more than a collection of rooms. "She loved photographing birds," came Henry's voice from the startling Sarah. She moved to close the album, apologies forming on her lips, but he raised a hand to stop her. "It's good that you know her. Everyone here walks around her pretending she never existed because they think it spares me pain." He crossed the room, settling beside Sarah on the sofa. She would have appreciated her approach with Ethan. No forced cheerfulness, just authentic presence. Their shoulders nearly touched as Henry turned pages, sharing stories behind photographs. Catherine's environmental conservation, her uncanny ability to spot rare birds, how she taught Ethan to identify dozens of species before he turned 5. This wasn't the steely businessman who had interviewed Sarah, but a husband who had loved deeply and continued to love beyond death's boundary. 3 weeks into her employment, Sarah introduced watercolors to Ethan's art supplies. Unlike markers or crayons, watercolors were patience, accepting that colors would blend in sometimes unexpected ways. The metaphor wasn't lost on Sarah as she demonstrated techniques, allowing pigments to bleed together on wet paper without trying to control the outcome. Ethan watched intently before attempting his own painting, a simple blue sky with a yellow sun, elementary yet purposeful. When Sarah commented how beautiful the sky looked, Ethan unexpectedly pointed to the upper corner of his, where a tiny brown dot broke the expanse of bird, he whispered. The word so soft, Sarah almost believed she'd imagined it. Maintained her composure, responding casually to avoid overwhelming him with reaction. The true watershed moment occurred during an afternoon when Sarah brought snack to the sunroom, where he was arranging small wooden blocks. A squirrel had appeared on the terrace, its antics increasingly dramatic as it attempted to reach a bird feeder, designed specifically to thwart such raiders. The squirrel's determined leaps and inevitable slides down the pole created a silent comedy that captured Ethan's attention. When the creature finally tumbled backward in defeat, a sound escaped Ethan, a small, rusty laugh that seemed to surprise him as much as it did Sarah. Henry, passing the open doorway, froze at the sound. Sarah turned to find him motionless, one hand braced against the doorframe as though needing physical support. His expression contained multitudes, joy breaking through like sunrise across a landscape long shrouded in fog, pain at the reminder of the laughter missed in 2 years of silence, and a naked vulnerability that transcended his usual guarded demeanor. Sarah recognized that look, the complex mixture of emotions that accompanied healing from profound loss, where a step forward simultaneously measured the distance from what had been lost. It was the same expression she had in her own mirror on the day she had finally sorted through her grandmother's belongings. Achievement with grief, progress intertwined with remembrance. While daytime brought measured steps of healing, nighttime held secrets that even Sarah's gentle approach couldn't reach. Could the very thing Ethan feared most, the uncontrollable rage of a thunderstorm, become the catalyst that finally shattered 2 years of silence, connected 3 wounded souls through a simple lullaby? The Mitchell household had settled into a new rhythm as spring gave way to summer. 3 months had passed since Sarah first stepped through those imposing doors, and the mansion no longer felt like a mausoleum, but a home slowly awakening from a winter. The staff moved lighter steps. Henry lingered at breakfast rather than rushing his office, and Ethan, though still silent, had begun to communicate in 100 ways, showed the gradual thawing of his frozen emotions. Sarah marked these changes with private satisfaction. The sessions had evolved into more complex art projects. Their afternoon walks now included Ethan pointing out birds with animated gestures, his eyes bright with recognition. He would sit closer during reading time, occasionally turning pages or selecting new books from the shelf. These were victories that couldn't be measured on any therapeutic but represented mountains moved in the landscape of grief. That evening, Sarah noticed the darkening sky through the library windows as she read to Ethan. The weatherman had predicted storms. The speed with which the clouds gathered suggested something more severe approaching. She was midway through a chapter when the first distant rumble of thunder caused Ethan to stiffen beside her. "Maybe we should finish this tomorrow," Sarah suggested, closing the book as she observed the pallor in his face. Ethan nodded quickly, his eyes darting the windows as lightning illuminated the garden in an eerie flash. When Sarah helped him prepare for bed, she noticed how his hands as he buttoned his pajama top. The atmosphere in the room felt charged, and not from the electricity in the air. Sarah recognized the signs of mounting, the shallow breathing, the darting glances, the way Ethan's shoulders hunched as if preparing for a blow. "It's okay to be scared of storms," she said softly, but Ethan only pulled the covers up to his chin, his jaw clenched tight. Sarah left his nightlight on and the door slightly ajar, an unspoken promise that she remained nearby. In her adjacent room, she listened to the increasing ferocity of the storm, rain lashing against the windows as thunder crashed overhead. The old mansion creaked and groaned under the assault, and Sarah found herself counting between lightning and thunder, an old habit from childhood when storms had terrified her equally. Crash that sent her running came not from the sky, but from Ethan's room. The sound of something falling found his bed empty, covers thrown back in haste. Lightning illuminated the room in staccato bursts, revealing a toppled lamp, but no sign of the boy. "Ethan?" she called softly, moving toward the closet, when a muffled whimper gave away his hiding place. She opened the door slowly to find him curled into the smallest possible space, wedged between hanging clothes and the wall, hands pressed over his ears, eyes squeezed shut. His entire body shook with silent sobs that's all the more heartbreaking for their lack of sound. Sarah knelt at the closet entrance, careful to crowd him. "May I sit with you?" she asked. When he didn't object, settled on the floor, leaving the door open so he wouldn't feel. Another crash of thunder made Ethan flinch violently. Tears streamed down his face, and Sarah recognized that this wasn't ordinary fear. This was trauma response, the kind that bypasses rational thought and plunges straight into survival instinct. According to the research she'd studied, experiencing profound, often developed fears connected to the circumstances of their trauma, or to where they felt equally powerless. "You know," Sarah said quietly, "I've always been afraid of thunderstorms too." She pulled her knees to her chest, mirroring his posture rather than trying to change his. "When I was about your age, a big storm knocked down the tree outside my window. The crash was so loud I thought the whole was falling apart." Lightning flashed again, illuminating Ethan's face. His eyes had opened slightly, focusing on Sarah as she continued. "My grandmother found me hiding under my bed. Instead of telling me not to be afraid, she crawled right under there with me." Sarah smiled at the memory, though the storm outside rattled the windows with renewed fury. "She told me that being scared doesn't make you weak. It just makes you human." Ethan's breathing had slowed slightly, his attention captured by the unexpected sharing of vulnerability from an adult. This approach aligned perfectly with therapeutic techniques for traumatized children, creating connection through shared experience rather than dismissing their fears. "My grandmother had a special song she would sing during storms," Sarah continued. "She said her mother sang it to her, and her mother before that. Would it be okay if I sang it now, just quietly, for both of us?" After a moment's hesitation, Ethan nodded, his eyes still wide, but his body slightly less rigid. Sarah began to sing softly, a simple melody with gentle words about rain, washing the world clean, and stars waiting behind the clouds. Her voice was untrained but warm, the kind that carried comfort rather than performance. As the lullaby filled the small space between them, Sarah watched Ethan's shoulders gradually lower, his hands loosen their grip on his knees. The storm continued its assault outside, but inside this closet, the rhythm of the song created a different kind of shelter. She had nearly finished the last verse when something extraordinary happened. Ethan's lips parted, and in a voice rough from disuse but unmistakably clear, he whispered, "My mom sang different words." Sarah froze, afraid that any reaction might startle him back into silence. 5 words, the first he had spoken in 2 years, hung in the air between them like something precious and fragile. "Would you?" Sarah's voice caught with emotion. She swallowed and tried again. "Would you like to teach me her words?" Ethan nodded, and then, miracle upon miracle, he began to sing. The melody was the same, but the lyrics spoke of birds, finding shelter during storms, and returning to flight when skies cleared. His voice grew slightly stronger with each word, as if remembering not just the song, but how to use the voice that grief had locked away. Neither of them noticed the bedroom door opening wider, nor Henry Mitchell standing transfixed in the doorway. It wasn't until Ethan finished the verse that Sarah caught movement from the corner of her eye. Henry stood motionless, one hand braced against the as if his legs might give way. His face held an expression of such profound emotion that Sarah felt like an intruder witnessing it. "Dad," Ethan said, the word both ordinary and miraculous. Henry moved forward slowly, kneeling beside the closet door. "Hey, buddy," he managed, his voice thick. "That was Mom's lullaby." "I remember," Ethan replied, 2 words that bridged a 2-year chasm. Henry reached out a trembling hand. Ethan took without hesitation. "Can you teach it to Sarah?" Henry asked. "The song?" Ethan nodded, moving slightly from his corner to the room. "You can sing too, Dad." The storm still raged, but inside the closet, 3 voices joined together. Ethan's tentative, but growing, Henry's baritone cracking with emotion, and providing the steady foundation held them together. They sang the lullaby again and again, each seeming to loosen that had been tightly bound inside the boy. When the storm finally began to subside, Ethan was half asleep against his father's shoulder, emotionally spent, but peaceful. Henry came back to tucking him in with a tenderness that spoke of years of love compressed into a single gesture. In the hallway afterward, Henry turned to Sarah, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "I don't know how to thank you," he whispered. "You don't need to," Sarah replied. The look that passed between them transcended their roles as employer and employee. In sharing Ethan's breakthrough, they formed a connection that neither had anticipated, both recognized as something rare and valuable. In the aftermath of Ethan's breakthrough, something shifted in the Mitchell household that could be undone, like a lock whose tumblers had finally clicked into place. As morning light filtered through the mansion windows, neither Sarah nor Henry realized they had crossed an invisible threshold between professional courtesy and something far more dangerous to them both. What had begun as a strictly professional arrangement was evolving with each passing day. Sarah found herself included in conversations that stretched beyond Ethan's care schedule. One evening, Henry took her into his study, not to discuss Ethan's progress, to ask her opinion on schools. "The private academy has an excellent academic record," Henry, spreading brochures at his mahogany desk. "But the Montessori approach might Ethan's need for creative expression." He looked at Sarah with genuine interest. "What do you think?" Sarah hesitated, acutely aware that educational decisions belong to parents, not employees. Yet expression conveyed something beyond professional consultation. He valued her judgment. The structure of traditional education might feel constraining after what he's been through, she offered carefully. The environment would give him space to process his emotions while learning. Henry nodded slowly, his eyes on her face longer than necessary. "That's exactly what I was thinking, but couldn't articulate." The moment stretched between them, electric with unspoken recognition. These became more frequent. He sought Sarah's input on family photographs to display, books for Ethan's library, weekend activities. Each time, Sarah felt the boundaries of her role expanding in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. She was becoming something more than an employee, but less defined than a friend, existing in a liminal space that had no name. Ethan's growing attachment complicated matters further. His voice, once locked away by grief, now filled the house with questions and observations, but primarily when Sarah was present. While he had begun speaking occasionally to it was Sarah he sought first, with his discoveries about birds spotted from his window, or thoughts about stories they'd read together. The red-tailed hawk made its higher this year, he told Sarah one morning, pointing excitedly toward the old oak tree. When Henry entered the room moments later, Ethan the observation without prompting, a bridge forming between the three of them that hadn't existed before. Sarah caught the look of wonder on Henry's face, followed by something softer and more vulnerable. In that moment, she recognized the dangerous territory they were. The gratitude of a father for his son's recovery could easily be mistaken for feelings, and she feared her own emotions were becoming equally. The household staff noticed the shift as well. Mrs. Martha's raised eyebrows when Henry insisted Sarah them for dinner, rather than eat separately, became a regular feature. Raymond's knowing smile when he prepared Sarah's coffee exactly as she liked it, without being asked, suggested the staff had formed their conclusions about the changing dynamic. The moment that crystallized their predicament came during a small dinner party Henry hosted for associates. Sarah had intended to take her meal in the kitchen as usual, but insisted she join, citing Ethan's comfort as justification. Sarah should be there, Ethan had declared with the simple certainty of childhood. It always makes everything better. Dressed in borrowed clothes felt like a costume. Sarah navigated the evening with careful distance, speaking only when addressed directly. As dessert was served, one of the women, the wife Henry's business partner, turned to Sarah with a warm smile. "Henry never mentioned how you two met," she said, her tone suggesting a relationship far beyond employer and employee. Before Sarah could formulate a response that wouldn't betray her confusion, the woman continued, "It's wonderful to see him with a partner who brings such joy back into this house. The way you connect with Ethan is truly beautiful." The table fell silent. Sarah felt heat rush to her face as she looked toward Henry, expecting him to correct the misunderstanding immediately. Instead, he hesitated, a fleeting expression of consideration crossing his features before he finally spoke. "Sarah and I have a unique," he said carefully, neither confirming nor denying the assumption. The conversation moved on, but the damage was done. That single moment of hesitation had acknowledged something neither of them had dared to. Later that night, after the guests had departed and was asleep, Sarah found Henry on the terrace, staring into the darkness of the garden his late wife had designed. "I should apologize for not correcting Elaine's assumption," he said, without turning. "It was selfish of me." Sarah joined him at the stone balustrade, a careful distance. "Why didn't you?" she asked, her voice audible above the evening breeze. Profile was by the soft light spilling from the house, revealing vulnerability she rarely glimpsed during daylight hours. "For a moment, I wanted it to be true," he admitted. "These past months, I've been less lonely than I've been since Catherine died. Not just because of Ethan's, but because of you." The confession between dangerous and fragile. Sarah gripped the cold stone beneath fingers, anchoring herself against the tide of emotions threatening to sweep away her professional judgment. "I'm employed to care for your son," she reminded him, voice steadier than she felt. "The progress we've made with Ethan could be undermined if we complicate that relationship." "Is that the only reason for your hesitation?" Henry, finally turning to face her. Sarah felt the vast gulf between them acutely in that moment, the mansion looming behind them, the designer watch glinting on his, the education and privilege that separated them more effectively than physical distance ever could. "You know it isn't," she acknowledged. "Look at this, Henry. Look at your life and mine. I was homeless when you found me. The society you belong to would never accept someone like me as your equal. I'd always be the charity case, the woman you rescued. Is that how you see yourself?" There was an edge to his question. "It doesn't matter how I see myself. It matters how the world sees us." Sarah hugged her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the mild evening. "I'm afraid of becoming too attached to all of this, to Ethan, to this life, to what happens when you realize I don't belong here." Henry stepped closer, close enough that she could sense his warmth without touching. "Perhaps the question isn't whether you belong in my world, but whether we might belong in a new we create together." The sentiment was beautiful, but naive, Sarah thought. Class differences didn't disappear through wishful thinking. Yet, something in his expression, a mixture of hope, uncertainty, mirrored her own heart. 3 days later, Henry approached her in the library, where she was helping Ethan with an art project. After Ethan left for his piano lesson, Henry remained, uncharacteristically hesitant. "The charity function next weekend," he said, hands in his pockets like a nervous teenager, rather than a confident. "The Mitchell Foundation's annual gala. Educational," Sarah nodded, already mentally calculating what Ethan might need in his father's absence. "I'd like you to attend," Henry, not as Ethan's caregiver, as my guest. The invitation hung in the air between them, a clear signal that he was willing to cross the carefully maintained boundary they had established. This was about convenience or Ethan's comfort. This was Henry Mitchell asking Sarah Collins to step into his world publicly. All the scrutiny and judgment that would follow. "People there," Sarah began. "We'll see what I see," Henry finished for her. "Someone remarkable who changed our lives." The custom gown that arrived at Sarah's door the morning of the charity gala felt like armor for a battle she wasn't trained to fight. The silken fabric whispered against her skin as she stared at her reflection, a stranger looking back at her with uncertain eyes. Society galas represented a threshold between privacy and public scrutiny that would test everything forming between her and Henry, a world where wealth and status determined worth more ruthlessly than any street corner ever could. "You look beautiful," Henry's voice came from the doorway, his eyes reflecting something that made her momentarily forget her insecurities. He stepped forward, a small velvet box in his hand. "These belong to my grandmother. I thought they might complement the dress." The diamond earrings inside caught the light, throwing prismatic patterns across the wall. Sarah hesitated, her fingers hovering above them. "Henry, I can't." "Please," said, his voice gentle but firm. "Tonight isn't where you came from or where I came from. It's about who we are now, together." As the car pulled up to the illuminated facade of the Maxwell Hotel, photographers lined the entrance, their cameras flashing like lightning. Sarah felt her breath catch. This wasn't just any charity, it was the social highlight of the season, where the city's elite gathered under the pretense of philanthropy. "Remember," Henry, his hand warm against the small of her back. They stepped onto the red carpet. "You belong here, just as much as anyone else." But wasn't something that could be gifted like diamond earrings or a designer gown. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and jewelry, air heavy with expensive perfume and weightier judgments. Conversations paused. They entered, a ripple of whispers in their wake. Sarah recognized the curiosity in their stares, the same expression she'd seen on the security guard's face the day she returned Henry's wallet. "Henry Mitchell," a voice called out, smooth as polished marble and just as cold. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten how to socialize after hiding away in that mausoleum of yours." The man who approached them wore his wealth like a second skin, comfortable and unquestioning. James Harrington. Sarah recognized him from the business articles she'd read while researching Henry after their first meeting. "James?" Henry nodded, his posture subtly shifting. "I'd like you to meet Sarah Collins." Harrington's eyes slid over Sarah with practiced assessment, noting the dress, the jewelry, and calculating their worth before finally meeting her gaze. "How interesting. I hadn't realized your philanthropic efforts extended to such personal involvement with your projects." The implication hung in the air between them, sharp and venomous. Sarah felt her cheeks warm, but kept her expression neutral, years of navigating difficult workplace politics serving her well. Henry's hand tightened, almost imperceptibly on hers. "Sarah isn't a project, James. She's the reason my son speaks again, the person who brought life back into our home, and the woman I'm fortunate enough to have by my side tonight." Harrington's smile never wavered, though something calculating flickered in his eyes. "How touching. Though I must say, Henry, you've always had interesting taste in dates. I suppose there's a certain appeal to the unpolished diamond." His gaze flicked to the earrings at Sarah's ears. "Or perhaps it's just about adding the polish." Before Henry could respond, a photographer approached, asking for a picture. The camera flash temporarily blinded Sarah, freezing the moment in what she would later recognize as the first of many public documentations of their evolving relationship. Throughout the evening, Sarah weathered similar encounters. Sugary venom delivered with practiced smiles, questions about her background that probed for weaknesses, and patronizing compliments about how natural she seemed. Each interaction was a test she hadn't studied for, in a language she was learning phrase by painful phrase. By the time they reached the dance floor, Sarah's face ached from maintaining her composed expression. Henry drew her close, his movements confident, as he led her in a waltz she'd hastily learned from YouTube tutorials the night before. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "I shouldn't have exposed you to this." Sarah looked up at him, suddenly aware of the dozens of eyes tracking their movements. "Did you mean what you said to Harrington? About me being the reason your son speaks again?" Henry's eyes softened. "Every word, but I left out the most important part." His hand pressed more firmly against her back. "You're the reason I'm speaking again, too. Not just words, but truth. I've been going through the motions since Catherine died. But with you, I'm present. I'm alive." The music swelled around them, but the moment felt isolated from the glittering chaos of the ballroom, a private confession in the most public of spaces. The following morning, their picture appeared on page 6 of the business section. Tech mogul Mitchell steps out with mysterious new companion. By afternoon, Sarah discovered 3 different speculative articles online about her identity, each less flattering than the last. "It doesn't matter what they write," Henry insisted, showing her an email from his publicist recommending they release a statement clarifying Sarah's role in his life. "We don't owe them explanations." But the increased scrutiny strained the delicate balance they'd established. Photographers appeared outside the gates when Sarah took Ethan to the park. Business associates called with thinly veiled inquiries about Henry's situation. Even within the household, the dynamic shifted as staff members navigated the changing relationship between employer and employee. "Perhaps we should be more discreet," Sarah suggested one evening, after turning down Henry's invitation to join him at another function. "Until we figure out what this is." The hurt that flashed across his face was brief, but unmistakable. "Is that what you want? Discretion? Or is it just easier than facing what's happening between us?" The question hung between them, addressing something they'd both been carefully avoiding, defining a relationship that had evolved beyond employer and employee, beyond friendship, into something neither had anticipated. Before Sarah could answer, Ethan appeared in the doorway, his expression serious, as he clutched a photograph to his chest. "Dad, can I show you something?" Henry nodded, the tension temporarily suspended, as Ethan approached and handed him the photograph, one Sarah recognized from the albums she'd discovered months ago. It showed Catherine Mitchell holding a much younger Ethan, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's frame. "I think Mom would like Sarah," Ethan said simply, his voice steady with conviction, "because she makes us happy again." The silence that followed was filled with the weight of permission from an unexpected source, the one person whose opinion mattered most to both of them. Later that night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Henry found Sarah in the garden, the space that had once been Catherine's now flourishing under Sarah's care. "We can't hide from this," he said, sitting beside her on the stone bench. "Not from the world, and not from ourselves." Sarah traced her finger along the edge of the bench. "People will always see what they expect to see. The wealthy man and the homeless woman he rescued. It reads like a transaction, not a relationship." "Then we'll show them something else," Henry replied. "Not through statements or explanations, but through time and truth." He took her hand in his. "I'm not asking for certainty, Sarah. Just courage. The same courage you showed when you returned my wallet instead of keeping it, when you connected with my son when no one else could, when you rebuilt your life from nothing." "What if we fail?" she whispered, giving voice to the fear that had been growing alongside their feelings. "What if the pressure becomes too much? Then we fail together, having tried something real," Henry answered. "But I don't think we will. We've both survived things that should have broken us. This," he gestured between them, "this is worth fighting for." In that moment, surrounded by flowers Catherine had planted and Sarah had nurtured, they made a choice. Not just to acknowledge what had grown between them, but to defend it against a world eager to tear it apart with whispers and headlines, and calculated cruelty disguised as concern. Sometimes the most sacred places in our lives are the ones we avoid the longest. For Henry Mitchell, the garden at the eastern edge of the estate had become such a place, a living memorial he couldn't bear to visit after Catherine's death. The roses she had selected with such care, the stone pathways her fingers had traced in architectural drawings, the bench where she had spent countless hours watching birds flit between feeders, all of it preserved like a museum to grief, untouched and slowly surrendering to neglect, until Sarah and Ethan brought it back to life. It began as a whispered suggestion from Ethan one spring afternoon. "Mom's garden is sad now," he said, his voice still carrying that slight hesitation, as if testing each word before fully committing to it. She wouldn't like it this way. The statement hung between them, more profound for its simplicity. When Sarah mentioned the conversation to Henry that evening, she watched something shift behind his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, that preservation wasn't the same as honor. The restoration became their project over the following months. Sarah, Ethan, and eventually Henry himself, rolling up his sleeves on weekend afternoons. What started as basic maintenance evolved into something more meaningful, not returning the garden to what it had been, but allowing it to grow into something new while respecting its origins. Every decision balanced memory with possibility. When certain plants couldn't be saved, they chose new ones together, with Ethan often suggesting varieties that would attract the birds his mother had loved to photograph. The garden transformed, not just physically, but in what it represented to them. It became less a monument to loss and more a testament to continuity, proof that beauty could evolve rather than simply be preserved or replaced. For Ethan, it offered tangible ways to share memories of his mother. For Sarah, it provided a space to connect with Catherine's spirit, rather than feeling she walked in her shadow. And for Henry, it became the first place where remembering brought more comfort than pain. 6 months after Sarah's appearance at the gala, the garden had fully awakened, bursting with color and sound. What made this morning different was Henry's unusual request that Sarah meet him there at 11, and that she wear the blue dress she'd worn the first time they danced together at home, spinning across the kitchen floor to music only they could hear. What Sarah didn't know was that Ethan had been Henry's co-conspirator for weeks. The boys' excitement barely contained as they made their preparations. He had helped select the ring, offering solemn opinions about which stone would catch the light in the way Sarah would most appreciate. He had practiced his role with a seriousness that made Henry's heart ache with pride. Most importantly, he had granted permission. Not that Henry needed it formally, but because he understood that this moment belonged to all three of them. When Sarah stepped into the garden that morning, she found it transformed once more. Small white lights had been woven through the climbing roses, creating a gentle glow, even in daylight. A path of river stones led to the center, where a small table was set for 3, not 2, a detail that immediately brought tears to her eyes. Henry stood waiting, Ethan beside him in a suit that matched his father's, both of them looking at her with expressions that made words temporarily impossible. As she approached, Sarah noticed how the sunlight caught in Ethan's hair, the same sandy shade as his mother's in the photographs, and how Henry's eyes held both anticipation and a quiet certainty. "This was where I asked Catherine to marry me," Henry said, when Sarah reached them, his voice steady but soft. 14 years ago, right here, among these roses." He gestured to the blooms surrounding them, their fragrance filling the morning air. "For the longest time, I couldn't imagine making new memories in this place. It felt impossible, as if any new joy would somehow diminish what came before." Sarah nodded, understanding flowing between them without words. She had felt similar fears in her own way, wondering if loving this family meant somehow competing with a ghost. "But I've learned something important," Henry continued, taking her hands in his. "Love doesn't divide or replace. It multiplies and transforms." He glanced at Ethan, who stepped forward with solemn purpose, a small velvet box held carefully in his palms. "This garden isn't just Catherine's anymore. It's yours too, and Ethan's, and mine, just like this family." The symbolic weight of the location wasn't lost on Sarah. Choosing this spot for a second proposal acknowledged the past, while simultaneously embracing the present and future. It created a sense of continuity and hope, not erasing what came before, but building upon it with respect and new love. Ethan looked up at Sarah, his expression so earnest it nearly undid her. "Sarah," he said, the box still closed in his hands, "will you be my mom?" The question, so direct, so vulnerable, contained everything that mattered. Not just a proposal of marriage, but an invitation to complete their healing. Henry knelt then, taking the box from his son, but keeping one hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Sarah Collins, you came into our lives by chance, but you've stayed by choice, yours and ours. Will you make that choice permanent? Will you marry me? Not just as my wife, but as part of this family we're rebuilding together." Sarah felt tears spill over as she looked at them both, this man and this child, who had become her world in ways she never could have imagined on that desperate day with a wallet in her hands. The proposal represented far more than a romantic milestone. It symbolized the full integration of past and present, creating a foundation for their future together. "Yes," she whispered, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Yes, to both of you." Ethan's arms wrapped around her waist first, his face pressed against her stomach in a fierce hug. Henry stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, a sapphire surrounded by smaller diamonds. Nothing like Catherine's ring, a deliberate choice that honored the uniqueness of each relationship. "I know what people will say," Sarah said quietly, as Henry pulled her close. "That I'm replacing her, that it's too soon, that we're building something new, while honoring what came before," Henry finished for her. "Those who matter will understand that." Ethan nodded seriously. "Mom would want us to be happy," he said with the clear-eyed wisdom children sometimes possess. "She told me that, before she got really sick." This revelation, that Catherine herself had prepared her son for a future without her, settled over them like a blessing. Sarah wasn't replacing what was lost, but helping create something new from the foundation of what had come before. Her acceptance of the proposal marked a significant turning point in their collective journey, solidifying their bond and setting the stage for a future filled with shared experiences. Later, as they sat at the small table Henry had prepared, with Ethan proudly serving the lunch he'd helped Raymond prepare, Sarah watched the sunlight play through the leaves overhead and felt a profound sense of rightness. The garden that had once been a memorial had become a bridge between two chapters of life, proof that joy could follow sorrow without diminishing its significance. What began in a moment of integrity had come full circle, transforming into something neither Sarah nor Henry could have imagined that day by the park bench. Their wedding day arrived with gentle morning light, filtering through the garden's restored splendor. The ceremony was deliberately intimate. No elaborate displays or excessive grandeur, just their closest friends gathered among the blooms that had witnessed both loss and rebirth. The garden, once a testament to grief, now stood as living proof that beauty could return after devastation. As Ethan walked Sarah down the aisle, his small hand steady in hers, she found herself momentarily breathless at how completely her life had transformed. The boy who once communicated only through silence and art now stood tall, proudly escorting her toward his father, with a smile that illuminated his entire face. "Are you nervous?" Ethan had whispered just before they began their walk, his sandy hair neatly combed for the occasion. "Just grateful," Sarah had replied, squeezing his hand. "More grateful than I know how to say." Henry waited beneath an arch of climbing roses, his eyes never leaving Sarah as she approached. The man who had once been merely a name in a business journal, then an employer, now stood as her partner in every sense. Sarah wore a simple ivory dress that caught the light as she moved, carrying wildflowers gathered from the garden that morning, Catherine's favorites interspersed with new varieties they had planted together. Their vows resonated through the garden, carried by a gentle breeze that seemed almost purposeful in its timing. They spoke of finding love in unexpected places, of building bridges between past and future, and of the family they had created through choice rather than circumstance. When Henry slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger, a band designed to complement her sapphire engagement ring, his hands trembled slightly, betraying the depth of emotion behind his composed exterior. "With this ring," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "I honor our journey where we've been and where we're going. Ethan stood between them as they exchanged rings, his presence the living embodiment of their unique path to becoming a family. When the celebrant pronounced them husband and wife, it was Ethan who cheered first, his joy infectious as it spread through their small gathering of witnesses. Later, as they shared their first meal as a married couple at a table set beneath the garden's oldest oak tree, Henry presented Sarah with an envelope. Inside were the founding documents for the Collins Foundation, named not after him, but after her. This foundation, Henry explained as Sarah examined the papers with widening eyes, will provide comprehensive support to individuals experiencing homelessness, not just temporary shelter, but job training, interview preparation, and connections to employers willing to offer real opportunities. Sarah ran her fingers over the foundation's mission statement, recognizing elements of her own story woven throughout. The foundation would focus particularly on those who had fallen through society's cracks, despite their skills and determination, people like she had been, needing not charity, but opportunity. It's already funded for the first 5 years, Henry continued, but I'm hoping you'll consider directing it yourself. No one understands its purpose better than you. Sarah looked up from the documents, momentarily unable to speak. The foundation represented not just Henry's faith in her abilities, but his profound understanding of what would truly matter to her. Not luxury or status, but the chance to create for others the same lifeline she had been given. This is, she began, searching for words adequate to express what this meant. This is exactly right. Ethan leaned forward, unable to contain himself any longer. Show him your surprise now, he urged, practically bouncing in his seat. Sarah exchanged a meaningful look with Ethan, who had been remarkably skilled at keeping their shared secret. With a deep breath, she reached for Henry's hand across the table. We have news of our own, she said, her voice soft but clear. In about 7 months, Ethan will have a new role as Big Brother. Henry's expression transformed from confusion to wonder in the span of seconds. You're pregnant? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, feeling Ethan's excited grip on her other hand. We found out last week. Ethan helped me choose how to tell you. Henry moved around the table without hesitation, kneeling beside her chair to place a gentle hand against her still flat stomach. A child, he murmured, looking up at her with eyes that contained universes of emotion. Our child. Ethan joined them, forming a small circle of linked hands. I'm going to teach the baby everything, he announced confidently, about birds and art and how to hide really good during hide and seek. In that moment, with the garden around them and their joined hands creating a protective circle around a future still taking shape, Sarah felt the full weight of the journey that had brought them here. From a park bench and an empty stomach to this abundance of love and purpose, the transformation seemed almost impossible to comprehend. 1 week after their wedding, they returned to that very park bench. The simple wooden seat had been restored, and a small, unobtrusive plaque had been affixed to its back. Choices that change lives, it read, with no names or dates, just a quiet acknowledgement of the moment that had altered 3 lives forever. This is where it all began, Henry said as they stood before it. A wallet dropped. A choice made. Ethan ran his fingers over the engraved words. What if you hadn't found Dad's wallet? He asked Sarah, his face suddenly serious. Or what if you kept it instead? Then we wouldn't be here, Sarah answered honestly. Sometimes the hardest choices lead us exactly where we need to be. As they walked through the park, hand in hand, Sarah noticed a woman sitting alone on another bench. Something in her posture, the careful way she held herself, the tension in her shoulders, struck Sarah with immediate recognition. The woman was dressed neatly, but in clothes that had seen better days, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee, as if absorbing its warmth. Without hesitation, Sarah approached her, Ethan and Henry, following a few steps behind. Excuse me, Sarah said gently. I hope I'm not interrupting, but I wondered if you might have a moment to talk. The woman looked up, wariness and curiosity warring in her expression. About what? About possibilities, Sarah replied, sitting down beside her. I'm starting a foundation focused on connecting people with skills to employers who need them. I'd love to hear your story, if you're willing to share it. As the woman began to speak hesitantly, Sarah listened with full attention, recognizing in this stranger's careful dignity and resilience the same qualities that had carried her through her darkest days. Within minutes, she learned the woman had been an administrative assistant before a medical crisis depleted her savings and cost her job. "We're holding interviews next week for positions at the foundation," Sarah told her, offering a card with contact information. "Your experience sounds exactly like what we need. This isn't charity, it's an opportunity, if you want it." The woman accepted the card with trembling fingers, her expression shifting from suspicion to cautious hope. "Why would you do this for someone you don't know?" Sarah smiled, feeling Henry's supportive presence behind her. "Because someone once saw a possibility in me when everyone else saw only circumstances. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to look beyond the surface." As they continued their walk through the park, Ethan skipping ahead while Henry's arm circled Sarah's waist, she placed a protective hand over her stomach. Their child would grow up understanding that compassion wasn't weakness, but strength, that integrity wasn't idealism, but the foundation of a meaningful life, and that sometimes the most important journeys begin with the smallest choices. Sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the simplest acts of integrity. Sarah's decision to return that wallet, when taking even a fraction of its contents could have eased her suffering, sparked a transformation beyond imagination. She didn't just change her own destiny that day, but healed a family fractured by grief. Life rarely telegraphs its pivotal moments. We face countless crossroads, where the harder path often leads to unexpected destinations. Sarah and Henry's story reminds us that true wealth manifests not in bank accounts or possessions, but in the courage to recognize another's humanity across divides of circumstance. In moments of darkness, integrity illuminates possibilities we never dared imagine.